what's that? There's nothing there. Why? Because I'm heartless. And today, we're talking about subordination, coordination, and combining. So when we're dealing with one of these three things, we're actually also saying that what the part of speech we're dealing with is the conjunction, okay? And conjunctions come in a variety, right? Because variety is the spice of life. Coordinating, which deal with coordination. Subordinating, which subordination, obviously. Correlative, which means that it's more than a one-word conjunction, and conjunctive adverbs, which are adverbs that are acting like conjunctions, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Conjunctions, conjunctions. You like conjunctions, kitty? Kitty! Kitty. She hates this. She hates it. Kitty. Well, now that the cat refuses education, let's move on to coordinating conjunctions. Now, coordinating conjunctions are kind of your run-of-the-mill conjunction. They come between ideas that are of relatively equal importance. So, for example, the punctuation here is I love him, comma, but he is kind of a jerk. So, what you see is that you have a comma right before this conjunction, and on both sides of it, you have this. You have two independent clauses. Obviously, the second one is actually a dependent clause because of this conjunction. So sometimes it's a stylistic choice. You might not need it depending on how long the clauses are. But again, that's going to be stylistic. You'll never be wrong if you do use it. But it can add a little bit of baggage, unnecessary baggage to a sentence. The way you've probably heard these conjunctions taught is if you've ever heard of fanboys, which is for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys. Fanboys. Get it? So this next part we've actually talked a little bit about, so it's more probably a review than anything else. But just to recap, independent versus subordinate clauses. So by definition, a phrase is incomplete, okay? It's a fragment because it does not contain either a subject or a verb. A clause, on the other hand, contains both a subject and a verb and thus has the potential to express a complete thought. However, not all clauses can stand alone, despite having the makings of a sentence, okay? So I like to think about it like this. So an independent clause is a complete thought that does not need a setup in order to make sense. In other words, it doesn't, there's no question that it presupposes, right? Or condition that it presupposes, rather. Independent clauses are definitive and they provide information that don't need circumstances to make sense, okay? In the most generic sense of the word. A subordinate clause, however, answers a question or sets up a condition, shows a causality, and it's introduced by conjunction or a conjunctive adverb that relates it to an independent clause. So for example, whenever I'm sad, whenever what? If you need more information to understand or make sense of something grammatically, we may have a subordinate clause, okay? Which leads us to our third set of conjunctions, which are the correlative conjunctions, okay? So in correlative conjunctions, you'll see that they're using some of the coordinating conjunctions as well as some of the subordinating conjunctions to show a relationship between different structures, okay? So it may indicate a choice, a comparison, a negation, conditions, and the way these usually are, the ones that you usually see are either or, neither nor, not only, but also, both and, as, whether, or, okay? And that could also be whether or not, right? And so this is kind of setting up, a sentence where you have two smaller parts that are of equal importance. So don't freak out over this diagram. It looks very confusing. I promise you that it's not. And the only reason I'm showing it to you is that I want you to see how we diagram so that when we have multiple things that are joined by a coordinate conjunction, so in this case, and is the coordinate conjunction for all three parts, this is how we would diagram that. okay? Because Ken, Kelly, and Kyle are all subjects of this particular sentence. And so basically you would treat them all like you would a normal subject where that's on that straight line. And then you have this dotted line saying that all three of these are joined by that coordinate conjunction and. See the same thing with the verbs, applauded and congratulated, and then finally with the direct objects, Mark, Mindy, and Martha. Okay, and notice that you have, you can still sort of see this cross on its side, as well as the smaller line between the verbs and the direct objects, indicating that they are in fact the receivers of the action applauded and congratulated. Now in this next slide, we have another diagram, but notice that rather than a coordinating conjunction with one independent clause, right, this is coordinating and correlative conjunctions with two or more independent clauses, right? So it's not a matter of having multiple subjects, multiple verbs, or multiple direct objects within one clause. Rather, it's that we have two clauses that are unto themselves make sense, right? And we're using that coordinate conjunction and, once again, to create a sense of more information that can be grouped together, right? So in this case, what happens is we still have this dotted line that's saying that there's some sort of connection between these two clauses, grammatically speaking. In this case, and actually goes on a straight line between the two, okay? And we'll see in a second when we look at subordinated conjunctions why we put and on a straight line as opposed to a diagonal line, okay? Once again, notice that we have a regular transitive verb with she hates grapes, but we have a linking verb in that first sentence, Cece is friend, my friend, okay? So this next part is subordinating conjunctions, and I've saved this one, I've been mentioning this one, so let's actually talk about it. So a subordinating conjunction adds info, but not info that is necessarily essential to the main clause, right? And so a subordinating conjunction introduces, obviously, a subordinate clause that indicates that there's a hierarchy of ideas, right? One is more important than the other, or one depends on another in order to make sense. So some conjunctions, and there's lots of subordinating conjunctions that are possible to use, that we use all the time, okay? And we can sort of separate them in terms of the kind of relationships that they indicate. So time would be one of them. So when we say things like when, whenever, after, as, before, we're talking about a time relationship between two clauses. Concession would be something in terms of, if you've ever heard of a concession speech, when somebody loses in office, right, a concession speech. So this is giving information that maybe previously you had given an argument against, and then you're saying, however, or although, this is indicating some sort of other information that complicates the idea. Contingency, the possibility of something happened. Conditions, reason, so something like because or since. Result, so that causality would be the same thing as a result. Comparison and contrast. So I said that a subordinating conjunction usually gives an hierarchy of ideas or indicates something that's less important. That's not always true. Sometimes it actually is essential to the sentence. So this is how you diagram subordinate clauses, and also is a good example of something where you need that subordinated clause in order to make sense of what's going on above, right? But it is contextual, right? You had to be maybe talking about grapes, or it has to be really important, because CC is my friend could stand alone, right? We don't necessarily need a reason why. If you tell us that she is, that might be enough. But notice, unlike the coordinating conjunction and, in this case we have the subordinating conjunction because. When we diagram a subordinating conjunction, we still use that dotted line in order to indicate a relationship of some sort, but rather than being on a straight line between the clauses, we have a diagonal line joining the clauses from verb to verb. And please do not make the mistake that I did. There should be a long line that's separating she and hates. I apologize. I'm not perfect, okay? Okay? That was called acting. You're welcome. So this last group of conjunction-like things is actually really tricky. Conjunctive adverbs can be really, really tricky to spot. I actually have trouble spotting them sometimes too, especially because of the way that they look like other conjunctions sometimes, even though they're not. The biggest test for a conjunctive adverb is called the movability test. And so what that means is if the conjunctive adverb or conjunction looking thing, right, can be moved to a different part of the sentence easily, then it is more likely than not a conjunctive adverb, not a true conjunction. So, for example, Cece is my friend because she hates grapes. Because she hates grapes, Cece is my friend. Uh, so this is an example, right? There's only two places where that conjunction can go, right? As opposed to something like however. In this case, an example would be like, however, uh, it has been said that dinosaurs have walked the earth. It has been said, however, that dinosaurs walked the earth. It has been said that, however, dinosaurs walked the earth. In this case, we can see that this conjunctive adverb can kind of move throughout the sentence. It has greater flexibility. And that's a terrible example, but that is actually the best test to see what it is. This also goes kind of along with our discussion of meta discourse, right? So sometimes conjunctive adverbs are there more to tell you how to read something rather than relating information. That being said, some of the functions of conjunctive adverbs are almost identical to a regular conjunction, right? So comparing and contrasting, consequence or causality. So just got to be careful with it. It's tricky. I don't expect you to be a master of it. I am certainly not always a master of it. But again, the movability test is your best bet. So the final thing we need to talk about is there are four types of sentences in terms of the kind of clauses they have. So one of you had mentioned in class this idea of a declarative, indicative, declarative, interrogative sentences, which those are also types of sentences, but those are descriptions of how they're actually functioning, which is an important descriptor to have. But this is kind of just saying the grammatical features, the way the information is actually structured within the sentence itself. So the first kind of set would be a simple versus a compound sentence. So a simple sentence is a sentence with one independent clause, right? So I want to marry the knight, okay? That is a simple sentence. Despite my love for Lady Gaga, I just can't stomach her first album. Now, this might be a little confusing, okay? Because despite my love for Lady Gaga is a kind of, it is a phrase. It's not a clause, however, right? Because clauses need to be in some way a complete thought. If we just said, despite my love for Lady Gaga, that wouldn't make sense. A compound sentence, on the other hand, is a sentence with two or more independent clauses. So this is why we are learning about the conjunctions right now, okay? Because a conjunction is going to connect two clauses sometimes. Sometimes it's just connecting words or nouns, right? Like Sam and Mary went to the mall. In this case, we're talking about two independent clauses joined by a conjunction. In this case, we have a compound sentence. Our other set of choices would be complex and compound complex sentences, okay? So a complex sentence is a sentence with one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses, okay? So, because I have a cold has a subject and a verb. Therefore, it's got to be some sort of clause because it is a conjunction, right? It's a subordinating conjunction. Therefore, it is not an independent, but a dependent clause. So if you have one independent clause, in this case, I can't drink too much this evening, and one dependent clause, because I have a cold, then you have a complex sentence. Now, a compound complex sentence is just one more variation on that. So in this case, you have two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. Now, obviously, the more clauses you have, the more phrases you have, the more complicated your sentence is going to become. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a not so good thing, because you don't want your reader to just not understand what you're talking about. So the big thing to understand is that you can use sentence combining. You can also not combine sentences, but it needs to be a deliberate choice, okay? So using subordination and combination is one way that you connect ideas in order to create more complex arguments, okay? Two sentences that have closely related ideas might make more sense as one sentence, so it avoids this sense of blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. You want things to have a sense of flow if you're trying to go for clarity. However, not combining sentences, as I said, is an interesting rhetorical choice. So for example, let's look at the sentence below. Some people love chocolate ice cream. Some people do not love chocolate ice cream, okay? Those are both completely perfect. They're perfectly fine sentences, right? But it feels like you're saying more than you need to. Some people love chocolate ice cream, but some do not like it. Okay, so now we've combined this sentence. We know that it is referring to chocolate ice cream. We don't need to say chocolate ice cream again. But again, what is this feeling here? It still feels a little bit formal, right? It's certainly still on the written side of things as opposed to the spoken side of things. Now let's try. Some people love chocolate ice cream, but some don't, okay? That would be the most condensed version, right? If we're combining the sentences. And again, this has kind of a conversational tone. On the other hand, if we say, some people love chocolate ice cream, some don't. This would be an example of a very kind of casual, blunt, right? This almost has like a sarcastic feel to it. So the thing you just need to be thinking about is what's the effect? Sometimes combining a sentence is going to make sense. Sometimes it is not going to make sense. And in playing with coordinating, subordinating conjunctions, playing with the punctuation is going to give different feels. So I encourage you to play with these things in order to get a sense of what is going to be the most effective for the tone of your piece. As always, if you'd like supplemental help, you can always go to the Hacker. I've keyed you into subordination, clauses, sentence types, and conjunctions. If you'd like to look up the definitions of those, as well as some examples of how to use them for your own writing.
Conjunction, junction, what's your function?
Hooking up words and phrases and clauses.
Conjunction, junction.